Hi there everybody and welcome back to the video channel. My name is Jonathan, and just before we start I want to mention you might recognize this little gospel package here. It's a Gospel of John that I'm giving out currently around County Leitrim and will be doing so for the next several months. If you've got one, please rest assured it's a free gift. I'm not asking you to join a church or join a group or give money. I'm not part of any organisation, so if you recognise me and you've seen the package, please be assured it's just a free gift. I have an interest in your soul's salvation and where you'll be in eternity. I'll be travelling around the rural counties and have been doing, so if you see a blue transit van with a Dublin reg or you meet me at the door, please feel totally at ease. This is not some catch. This is not some scheme I'm involved in here. But again, back to our video here today. I'm here, as I've said, not too far from Drumshanbo here on the shores of Lough Allen, and I'm here beside this little stone beehive structure. This is called St. Hugh's Sweathouse. Maybe you've been to see it. You know, a sweathouse was really one of ancient Ireland's health treatment facilities. And because in rural Leitrim here they had very little access to health care, they built many of these little beehive stone structures in the countryside. And what happened simply was this, that a fire was lit in the enclosure with turf and sticks and timber, left to burn for several hours, and then the embers were raked out and a person would crawl inside this stone structure here. And again, with the heat and the sweat, and it was thought as well, these stones here have a high concentration of iron deposits. This was believed to be a real benefit to people as regards their health. It was thought to cure all forms of health problems. If you had arthritis, if you had rheumatism, if you had a fever, this was thought to be the answer. And many of these exist. This was in particularly good condition, but there could be as many as 100 that have been discovered here around rural County Leitrim. The Bible mentions the word sweat twice. First of all, in Genesis chapter 3, it speaks about Adam. After Adam and Eve had disobeyed God and taken the forbidden fruit and were expelled from Eden, God said to Adam, "From now on, you'll be working and toiling and sweating." He said, "In the sweat of your face, you'll eat your meals, you'll eat bread." Because of Adam's sin, because of his deliberate rebellion against God, life was to become a burdensome ritual. And I think we all can relate to that to some degree. You know, if there's a farmer listening here, you think about the thorns and the briars and the thistles. None of those in Eden. Thorns and thistles are because of sin. Sin has affected the animals. It's affected the ground. It's affected the physical plants. It's affected us. That's why we die. That's why our body degenerates. And the very first mention of sweat is because of sin. The second mention of sweat is in the Gospels. And it mentions when Jesus Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane prior to the cross, and as he anticipated the sufferings of Calvary, it says his sweat was, as it were, great drops or globules falling down to the ground. Jesus Christ was really human as well as divine. And as he anticipated the cross of what it would mean to be made sin for guilty human beings. The two mentions, and the only two mentions of sweat in our Bible. So let's come back again to these sweat houses here in Leitrim. Did they actually work? Well, you know, modern research will tell us, that it certainly helps the blood circulation, a spa or a sauna, and it may help to take toxins from the body, but really, many will think that in many ways, really, these sweat houses here were perhaps more of a placebo effect than anything else. You see, what is the gospel message today? People think about the gospel and think about mass and church and chapel and prayers and penance. That's not the gospel. The gospel is a personal invitation to trust in Jesus Christ. The gospel is a nature change, not something you and I can do. You see, the problem lies with our nature. You know, we have the idea that somehow we can refine our character, we can be good people. We have a nature that's corrupt, that's vile, and it's absolutely irreparably damaged that we can't change. That's, for example, why in John chapter 3, Jesus Christ speaks to Nicodemus, who's religious and educated and devout. And Jesus said, "Nicodemus, you must be born again." the gospel and the salvation is coming to Christ as your personal Saviour. That's why he died on the cross. We mentioned sweat and Christ sweating at Gethsemane. He sweat because of Calvary. And if you trust Christ today as your personal Saviour and your Lord, you will be saved. That's the guarantee of the Bible. You know, salvation is a wonderful possession to have. You know, after the period here in the sweat houses, quite often the folk would have had a dip in a cool river or a stream. As you can see just beside us here, perhaps to the outside the frame, you'll see the stream running down here beside me. You know, I'm reminded just now of a verse in the Old Testament, and it could be applied to the gospel. As cold waters to a thirsty soul or a thirsty person, so is good news from a far country. Christ came from heaven, lived here as a man, died on the cross, that you might be saved and be in heaven. Remember this, friend, as you listen today. There's only two places on the far side, heaven or hell. No in between. Christ spoke about everlasting punishment or life eternal. But on the cross, Jesus Christ said, it is finished. There's nothing you can do to add to a finished work, or I can do. But simply come humbly and trust Christ. Realize that your problem is not what you do really, it's what you and I are by nature, and we can't change that. But trust Christ, he'll give you a new nature. He'll save your soul, and you'll have the guarantee of being in heaven when life is over. Thanks again for joining me here in Leitrim. If you're ever in the area, just call in to see this rather interesting beehive structure, St. Hugh's Sweat House. But again, if you would like a Bible pack, please feel free to make a request online to ask one. And again, thanks just now for joining me here in Leitrim. And again, your time, as always, folks, is much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.